Hello, and thank you for joining me for our 32nd Naturally Scott podcast. I'm Scott Harris, your host. Looking forward to today's episode, and we are going to be talking to Steve Mietz. Steve is the president and CEO of Save the Redwoods League. We'll be talking to Steve a bit about his own past, a lot of it spent with National Park Services and a variety of parks around the western United States. But we're talking, the big focus is on redwoods. And when I say big, I'm talking 300 feet tall and 2,000 years old. These are massive trees. I spent a lot of time there in my youth, and if you haven't had a chance to visit, it's a spectacular thing in Northern California, a little bit in Southern Oregon, but well worth seeing. Steve is doing what he can to save these beauties. There are only 5% of the redwoods left from what there were at the height. Those 5% have been secured, which is fantastic, although they do face some danger from fire, something Steve is working with on a daily basis, trying to combat that, and he'll explain how they're doing that. The redwoods, acre for acre, are the world's most efficient and important carbon processor, so well worth saving if it's not just for the beauty and the habitat and the other animals that make their living in and around the redwoods. That's a neat thing just for us, for the carbon. He puts together and coordinates public, private, nonprofit, indigenous tribes, state and federal parks, all in an effort to bring this together, and is doing a magnificent job of it. And one of the things I love, we get to talk to a lot of conservation people on this show, and I feel honored that we get to do that. But Steve's a little bit different in that Save the Redwoods League, one of the things they're trying to do is bring back old growth forests, which means their long range plans are 200 to 300 years to try to bring back some of these old growth forests. So that is a little different perspective than most groups bring, and it's fun to hear him talk about it. So stay with us, listen to what Steve has to say, and enjoy yourself. And as always, when you're out there in nature, stay safe and stay curious. Take care now. Welcome to Naturally Scott. I'm your host, Scott Harris, and we are off on another adventure today. And as I'll talk about a little bit during the conversation, it takes me back to my childhood. I grew up in California, and so part of what we're going to talk about today, I guess you can see it on Steve's shirt, Save the Redwoods League. But part of what we're going to talk about today really does bring me back. I would like to introduce to you Steve Mietz, not Steve Yankees. I want to be very clear about that. Steve Mietz, who is president and CEO of Save the Redwoods League, which we're going to talk about extensively today. But before we do that, let's back up a little bit, because in doing some research, and Steve and I are meeting for the first time today, but let's talk about your schooling, Montana and Cornell, right?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Okay. Cornell's close to me. I live in South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
About an hour and a half from Cornell. But talk to us a little bit about your schooling and how you picked your major, and then we'll move forward from there.
Yeah, growing up, I was a Boy Scout and an Eagle Scout, proud Eagle Scout, and really connected with nature. I grew up in New Jersey, in suburban New Jersey, and really found that connecting to nature really grounded me in my life. And it was the thing during a very chaotic childhood that really gave me some peace and tranquility. And I learned a whole bunch of outdoor skills there, and really kind of guided my entire life. It then put me on a goal to try to help service of all people and service to the planet as well. As growing up in New Jersey, where in the 70s and 80s, it was quite a bit of pollution, quite a bit of work to try to work on ocean dumping and restoring, just trying to create a baseline conditions for human habitation of the planet. And really that's what was going on as I grew up. And really that really captured my imagination that I could be part of that, and really wanted to be part of a movement that could help make this planet habitable for all the critters on it, as well as human beings. And so really that's what I did when I went to undergrad and Cornell and studied. I really was focused on policy and economics, really interested in the economic ways to make this false dichotomy between that it was economics or the environment. I never felt that was true. And so I really working on environmental economics and looking at that quite a bit, and policy and how to implement that, how to be effective policies. And in terms of both tax policies and just overall, not just regulatory policies, but making a really positive way to economic incentives to help protect and restore the environment. And so from there, I went to the University of Montana in Missoula, which was just lovely. I always wanted to come out west. I'd gone on a backpacking trip when I was a scout in New Mexico when I was about 15, and it really changed my life. It really exposed me to the Western United States and the big wide outdoors and the big tall mountains. And I really, that's where my heart really was captured and my soul felt like that is really where I need to be. And so I took the chance to go to grad school out west in Montana and haven't been back. Even though my mom continues to ask repeatedly when I'm moving back to New Jersey, and I just visited her recently. It was lovely, but and it's a lovely state, and it's certainly in a wonderful state now compared to where it was in the 70s and 80s. But I really do enjoy being in the West. In graduate school, I studied environmental studies and really worked on looking at grizzly bear corridors and using what was then a new technology called Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, a lot of folks refer to it as, which is basically this beautiful tool that both takes cartography and databases, and it allows you to merge those two together. So you have art and science working together to help inform you and look at the landscape. And so I worked on that, and I was a GIS analyst for about 15 years coming out of graduate school as the early part of my career, which really exposed me to a wide array of different natural and cultural resource issues and really prepared me well for this position.
Well, that's fantastic. That's a neat story. Let me just back up and touch on a couple of things. Number one, I'll be in Missoula in January.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm meeting with a gentleman named Denver Holt, and he's going to help me do some research on long-eared owls for a different book that I'm writing. And I'm very excited about that. And the Boy Scout thing, I have to do a shout out. So I ran my own company for 35 years, and so I would get resumes for job openings. We were a small company, 15, 18 employees, whatever the number was. And so as the owner, I would go through a lot of the resumes. And I realized one day as I was sitting there going through resumes that every time I saw one that said Eagle Scout, I would put it in the maybe pile. It was just an automatic for me. It was like a veteran. Those were the two things, right? If somebody served in the armed forces or somebody was a Boy Scout, I put them in the maybe pile. From there, you figure out what you're going to do. And I realized that becoming an Eagle Scout is virtually the one thing you can do as a child that you get to still claim as an adult. You are an Eagle Scout. You were a valedictorian, or you were the quarterback, or you were the homecoming team, but you are an Eagle Scout, which is why I forced my son to become an Eagle Scout. He was not nearly as excited about my epiphany as I was, but nonetheless, we made a deal where I told him he had to stay in scouting until he became an Eagle Scout, which is why he was the youngest Eagle Scout in the history of Ventura County in California. Yeah. And honestly, didn't even go to the awards assembly. He got the phone call that he'd passed, that he'd become an Eagle Scout. And he said, "Dad, that's it. You told me I could get out." And scouting, when my son went through it, was a lot different than when you and I went through it.
Yeah.
I never made Eagle. I made it to life. Mm-hmm. I lost out on my Eagle Scout because Monday Night Football started and our troop disbanded because none of the leaders wanted to continue. They wanted to watch Monday Night Football. And they couldn't pick another night. So our troop actually dissolved as a result of Monday Night Football. Which is why, probably why I wound up in marketing instead of a naturalist. Now, so anyway, I wanted to share those couple of things with you. And now when you finish that, you spent some time, and I've got a checklist here. I'm sure you can add to it, but we can talk about these. Redwood National Park, Point Reyes National Seashore, one of my favorite places in the world. Grand Canyon, another. Pearl Harbor, and Great Basin. You spent time in all of those. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, no, I basically, my early part of my career, I worked for a variety of different groups. I worked for a Native American tribe in Western Montana. I worked for the Grizzly Bear Recovery Program, as I mentioned, for both graduate school and my first few years out. I worked for the University of Montana for a few years doing research on Flathead Lake. But then I transitioned and went to Grand Canyon to study the impacts of Glen Canyon Dam on the downstream resources of the Colorado River. And that was actually not working for the Park Service, and it was working for the U.S. Geological Survey. And then after working there for a few years, I decided that I really, rather than just studying it, I really wanted to get involved in the actual management of trying to improve this resource. And so I switched over to the National Park Service, and that's where this wonderful career where I traveled the Western United States from Grand Canyon. I went on to become superintendent. One park you didn't mention was my first superintendency was at Missouri National Recreational River, which is a wild and scenic portion of the main stem Missouri River in South Dakota and Nebraska. So I lived in the high plains for a few years and was superintendent there. Really interesting. It really worked well working off my experience working on the Colorado River, the Missouri being 10 times bigger, but the issues very, very similar in terms of some of the impacts of regulated river. And anytime you put a dam on a river, it just completely changes the ecology of it, which endangers all the native species in there and creates a whole bunch of other issues. So, all the rivers in the country are working on these issues in one way or another. And it was really a great honor to work on two of the major river systems in the country. And then from there, I went on to Great Basin National Park, which is just fabulous, fabulous place. And if folks haven't been to, it's one of the least visited national parks, but in my opinion, one of the most spectacular. It has some of the oldest trees in the world. It has a giant limestone cavern that you can go into, like Carlsbad Cavern. Wonderful. And it's all within a very small park relatively for a Western United States park. And so just absolutely wonderful to spend time there. And then I toured a few different parks. I was just honored to go to Pearl Harbor to help them reopen the dock. The dock was closed at Pearl Harbor, and they asked me to come in and help get that reopened so that Americans could pay their respects to those 900 fallen sailors on the USS Arizona. And that was one of the greatest honors of my life to switch over, and such a great piece of working with the National Park Service because they have both the natural and cultural history that they work on, and merging those two together in my career has just been absolutely wonderful. And of course, working at Point Reyes is just a fabulous, fabulous place. So many complex issues, so much interesting things, so much interest by the Bay Area and all the local community, as well as nationally and internationally. And of course, then finally, my last job at Redwood National and State Parks, it really was the capstone for my career, where I really made this connection with Save the Redwoods League. We worked so closely together. They were our closest partner there at the park. I worked with them. I was a signatory on the original agreement of Redwood Rising, which is our large scale restoration program within the parks that the league helped kick off, facilitate, and continues to be highly engaged in restoring these second growth, really sick, unhealthy forests and bringing them back and on trajectories to become the old growth great forest that the rest of the park is also protecting. And it's been a wonderful exposure to work so closely with the league. And now I get to move over and work even across the entire range, and not just within Redwood National and State Parks, work across all the Redwood and Sequoia ranges. It's just been a wonderful life and a wonderful career of contributing and service. And I'm just looking forward to years more of doing it.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for the work you're doing, by the way. We could wrap up the podcast now, except we haven't discussed the redwoods. So we will do that. And tell me about redwoods. You've had a varied career from battleships to rivers to redwoods. Well, you know what? Let me just back up one more step, if I may. You mentioned grizzlies a couple of times.
Yes.
Did you cross paths with a gentleman named Doug Peacock?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay, so Doug Peacock is a Vietnam vet and came back and has spent the last 40 years studying grizzlies in Montana and Wyoming, and was just recently a guest on the podcast. A fascinating guest, by the way. Just whatever image you conjure up of a man who was a Green Beret, served 2 tours in Vietnam, and then studied grizzlies, that image is accurate.
That's
when you think of this man.
Yeah, that's the perfect person to be doing that work. And so hopefully he's using my maps. I hope so.
I would imagine he might have, as a matter of fact. So I'm hoping to meet him when I go up to Montana and Wyoming in January.
Wonderful.
So why redwoods?
Montana and Wyoming in January. Good for you. All right.
I go every January. This will be the first year that I don't go to Yellowstone.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm doing these other things instead.
Mm-hmm.
But normally that's my solitude trip. I go to Yellowstone in January.
Nice.
And I think it's as close to magical as a place can be.
Yes.
With all due respect, I love all national parks.
Yes.
I've been to 56 of the 63. And so I'm a giant fan of and an advocate of national parks. But there is something about Yellowstone, and not the geysers and all the things that they're known for, but Lamar Valley in the winter.
Yes.
Yep.
I know.
Well, you've been, there you go.
I know.
I've shared this story.
That valley, so that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful, and I would just challenge you to come and hike with me in the redwoods, and I might change your mind on what the most.
It's not a challenge; it's an offer accepted, and I will definitely do that. And I love the Redwoods. I mean, I spent a lot of time there. I grew up in California as a Boy Scout,
Yeah.
did some hiking and camping up there. As a matter of fact, my wife and I back in 1981, we did a 6-month driving trip around the country. And leaving Southern California, the first night of that 6 months was spent in the Redwoods.
Mm.
So it holds a place in my heart. But why Redwoods for you? Why have you now shifted your experience and your education and your passion into Redwoods?
What I love about the Redwoods is both the inspiration that the Redwoods provide for folks, the solitude that they provide as we connect people and communities in the Redwoods and people from around the world to the Redwoods, but also this huge challenge we have with the Redwoods and Sequoia ranges to really restore them and really try to bring them back from a very, very sick, very fire prone situation that's very treacherous for both these very old trees that are really in danger of catastrophic wildfire. They're really in danger from climate change. The challenge is there. The inspiration is there. It's really the culmination of all my skills and ability that I can apply here in a very complex partnership environment to be able to gather the right partners, diverse partners from across tribal communities, local nonprofits, state, federal agencies, and bringing them all together on a common mission to restore these redwoods, protect these sequoias from these really imminent and urgent threats that we have. And so it's just every day you wake up and you have just so much to do to really meet this challenge. And the great thing about this moment in time, it's very dark, right? It's very much, it feels as if folks are really struggling right now to do this. And I really do feel like we, the Save the Redwoods League, can really be a part of the solution here. We have the answer to a lot of the problems that are illing the forest of the West. And we really just want to continue to promote that and talk about it and really bring more folks in on this mission of trying to save these forests from all
I've
the
lost you here
management
for
of the last 100 years that we now need to kind of make up for over the next few years. And so we really can be the light and the inspiration for folks when they're looking and grasping for something. Not only can the redwoods heal folks as they visit old growth redwoods, but we can also show folks a way out of this very challenging natural resource situation that we're in right now across the American West with our unhealthy forests.
Okay, so I want to ask some more details about what those challenges are and how we might do that. But help me understand the difference between redwoods and sequoias.
So they're
Because
like
sequoias
cousins.
are a part of your mission as well,
They are.
correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes. So we cover both the ranges. We're the only organization that actually looks at the entire redwood and entire sequoia range holistically and looking at protecting these ranges and also restoring these ranges and connecting people to these great, magnificent forests, especially folks who don't have the opportunity to get out and visit these forests because for whatever reason they don't have the transportation. And so that's really what's inspiring. The difference between the two trees, they're cousins, really. They're both old. They share many characteristics the same, but they also live in very different environments. One lives on the coast and is very dependent on that coastal environment of the fog and the rain and that environment. And then others live up high in the Sierra and are dependent on that forest and very adapted to that. But they are cousins, and that's why we also look at that. We have a third tree. There's a dawn redwood that is in China that we also is the third redwood out there of this triad of redwood trees.
So is a sequoia a redwood then?
Yeah, they're cousins. They're related. Yeah, they're
Okay.
both.
Okay.
Yeah,
So do you work with Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon and
we do. So we work. There is a group called the Giant Sequoia Land Coalition, which is similar to Redwood Rising, which is focused on trying to do, like I talked about earlier, creating some wildfire resilience is one of the main goals. Going into some of these forests where there has fires been suppressed. Fire is not a negative thing in the ecosystem. It's a natural part of the ecosystem. But what's happened is over 100 years of suppressing fire, so much has grown up. There's so much fuel on the ground. There's so many shorter trees that are now creating that lateral fuels to go up into the crowns and burning our giant sequoias, these giant 1,000-year-old, 2,000-year-old giant trees. And so this Giant Sequoia Land Coalition works together to actually really try to bring resources and focus, working as a partnership between federal, state, nonprofit, and groups to really work and restore that landscape through thinning the forest and removing a lot of that biomass from the landscape. So when fire does come, which it will come, it's not going to be as catastrophic as some of the recent fires that have gone through and destroyed some of these irreplaceable old growth sequoias. And so we do work in there, and we work again, as we normally do in, say, the Redwoods League. We work in partnership with all our state and federal and local partners and tribal partners.
My wife and I, 2 summers ago, were up at Jasper National Park in Canada, and we were talking to one of the rangers there, and she was explaining the danger of the fire, potential for fire in Jasper, for the same reasons you're outlining. In nature, it's fine. It goes through, burns the undergrowth, life is good, woodpeckers are happy, the major trees live, everything's good. But because they had been suppressing the fire and the pine trees had grown up in between the old growth, it was a tinderbox. And it was less than a month later that major fire hit Jasper and destroyed everything, the town, the national park, the whole thing. So is part of what you're doing then, are you going through and tearing out some of that undergrowth and
Correct. Yep.
some of that fuel?
And we're removing the fuel from the landscape. We're either burning it, we work with local tribes, and we work with the Forest Service and the Park Service and tribes that help, bring fire, this lower intensity fire, these ground fires that are not going to crown, to bring in and remove the fuels. But we also actually go in and mechanically remove some of that undergrowth to help restore it back to where it was 100 years ago, when it was a much more fire resilient landscape. And really it's key now, even more so because of climate change, with the warming climate and the drought that created a great deal of mortality of the trees in the Sierra Range. It's really important that we get in there. It's a race against time to try to get in and save as many of these trees as we can by doing this thinning work and getting that extra fuel off the landscape, so that the next fire that comes through will just burn at a much lower intensity and actually be an ecological restoration tool. I mean, that's actually part of what we want. We want fire back on the landscape. And that's why we're working with the local tribes to help bring that back. We have a property there in the Sierras as well, where we work with the tribes who are bringing their cultural heritage back. I was actually very honored to go out with, we had several local tribes in the Southern Sierras come out and work with us on a cultural burn, and they brought a whole bunch of their tribal youth with them. And it was just really great to see that on a Save the Redwoods League property, we had tribal chairmen, tribal elders teaching the youth of the tribe how to bring fire back the way that they would have 100 years ago been bringing fire to that landscape, that helped create this fire resilient landscape.
So 2 questions come out of that. Number one, is there anybody who's against what you're trying to do? I mean, is there anybody who's saying it's not worth the investment, or we don't care about the trees, or get out of my backyard?
No, I actually don't think so anymore. I think the year 2000, not only was COVID creating a massive amount of chaos in our society, but also here in California, we had the skies were orange for weeks on end in major urban areas like San Francisco. And there were so many major catastrophic wildfires that were this high severity, burning crowns, really creating ecological disaster on the ground. That really seemed to be the tide that turned, that folks realized that we need to take action. And we don't face the feedback. The only thing I think the biggest problem to progress, or the biggest impediment to progress, is really just apathy. People thinking there isn't a solution to this, when in fact, I feel very strongly there is a solution, and we have the solution. And this is what's so great to talk to you, Scott, is to say, we have the solution to this thing you were talking about in Jasper. We know what the answer is. We just need the resources, and it's scalable. We need to scale this across the whole Western North America to restore all these forests that have been that has too many fuels in it, to really get to this ecological state that gets them ready for the climate change that's coming in the next century.
So I want to talk to you about this. This is a broader, more macro than the redwoods, but you've touched on something that I think is incredibly important. And my son, who's a producer in the show, he and I have talked about this at length. And as a marketing expert, I mean, that's what I spent my career doing. I think I have some insight into this. But you mentioned the apathy, the thought that, well, there's really nothing we can do. And I believe that a lot of this is a result of the conservation effort. And the reason is because we can only hear the sky is falling so many times. We need to get out there and tout some of our successes. We tore this dam down and the salmon are back. We saved the bald eagles and the peregrines from DDT. We're creating corridors for the megafauna to go back into their migratory. And I think part of what happens is, and I'm not talking about you personally, nor am I questioning the passion of the people involved, but for so long, it has been so dark for all of the people that are, let's say, in your world, right? Whether you're trying to save grizzlies or lakes or birds or redwoods, that it's almost hard to recognize that, my God, we have had some successes, that we can win this battle.
Yes, sir.
It's not easy, it's not cheap, and it's not simple, but by God, it can be done. And I just think we need to get that message out there, because exactly what you're talking about, we've just all, as a general public, been beaten over the head for so long, which is it's terrible, it's terrible, it's terrible. The earth is exploding. We're all going to die. It's going to be painful and horrific. And, only a select few will be saved. And at some point you just go, well, the heck with it. Then I'm just going to go to work and watch the game and have a barbecue, because I can't really fix it. Is there something to be said for that? I mean, is there something to be said for let's get the winds out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's get the winds out there. And that's exactly, I think what we need to do now as an environmental community is really be leading with hope and leading with inspiration. And that's what we do at, say, the Redwoods League. We have, like I said, we don't have all the answers. We're a science-based organization, but we have enough answers now to be taking action at scale, at large scales, beyond even California. And this work really needs to be done. And it's inspirational. When you're connecting tribal communities back to land they haven't been on for 100 years, that's inspirational, people. It's nonpartisan. This is something that I think every American can get behind. We don't want our forest. No, I don't think there's any American who wants our forest to burn catastrophically and just be an ecological desert. They want a resilient forest. It creates good paying jobs. All this work we're doing creates good paying jobs. There's an economic incentive about doing all this work. We could really create this restoration economy. There's a lot of hope with the work we're doing. We're actually working, we're protecting these areas that Americans treasure, but we're also restoring these areas that are really set up to really fail at this point. And we really need to get at it. And I think it's a message of hope. It's a message that really inspires folks that get engaged. And the only daunting part of it is the massive size of it. But if more folks would just stop hand wringing and doom scrolling and just get involved and just start getting to work on this, the answers are out there. We just need to do it. We just need to stop fighting with each other and just get to work, right? And that's what I'm about. Just get to work. We have the work to do, and it creates good jobs. It creates a good economy, and we're all going to be better off no matter what your political persuasion is. And that's really our message at, say, the Redwoods League is we have all these answers, and we want to work with folks to try to create and scale this up as wide as we can to get at this problem as quickly as we can and solve it and really be that light, be that leader and that light in this dark.
Well, that's a powerful message. And I will tell you that my producers, when we're done with this show, they go through and they create clips that we throw up. And the part that you just said will be a clip, which you can use wherever you want, because I think it's an extremely powerful message. And I think it's one that needs to get out there. And it wasn't when I started, and the show's new, by the way. You're about the 32nd or 33rd guest, but we're already in the top 25% of all podcasts worldwide. People are watching and listening. And the more we can get this message out, and I've come to believe that this is an important component of the show, is yes, I want to talk about how fun it is to go birding or hike through the redwoods or watch the elephant seals at Point Reyes or whatever it is you're doing, but that we can save the future, that there is a way. We're not going to be the last ones to see the redwoods or to see the elephant seals if we do this right. Give me your sales pitch, and I don't mean that in any way crass, but give me your sales pitch on the value of the redwood forest and the sequoia forest. Why do we care if they go away or not?
Right. Well, there's just so many things the redwood and sequoia forest provide. I'll just talk about redwoods specifically right now. So acre for acre, the redwoods are the greatest carbon sink on the planet. Yeah, not the Amazon, but the redwood forests of California and a little bit of Oregon are the greatest carbon sink on the planet. So the more we invest in this restoration work I was talking about, moving these forests from these sick, second growth, thin little redwoods and Douglas fir and really get it on these old growths, these big, giant old growth redwoods are putting on more carbon. And we've studied this and shown that. And so that's one ecological service that's directly a benefit for the work we're trying to do to really bring down the carbon levels and try to stabilize the climate. But of course, redwoods and sequoias provide, and all forests provide so many other ecological services for all the critters that live in them. They provide clean water, they provide the clean air, they're providing all these other services that we depend on. But I think really deep down, those ecological services really mean less. They're not as important as, to me, the inspiration that these forests provide. I think that there's so much banality in life. There's so much that's boring in my mind in terms of our modern life. But when you go and you see something that is 2,000 years old and 300 feet tall and 20 feet across, all of a sudden it puts your life in perspective, right? You think about what that tree has lived through, what it can survive. And when you see these redwoods survive these catastrophic wildfires and then they bounce back and you see that resilience, it provides an inspiration for people that they really need right now. I think what we need the most right now is inspiration and hope to move past this division that we have in our country right now, to bring everyone together with a message of hope and restoration. And that's really what we're about here. And that's what I think the greatest thing that the Redwoods forest can bring is this message of hope and restoration.
Well, that's a magnificent message. Are you familiar with John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie?
No, I'm not.
Oh, well, then let me share this with you and the audience. I'll throw a copy of it. First of all, I just have to say, I have the largest collection of Travels with Charlie in the world. I have it in 40 something different languages. It changed my life. John Steinbeck, who I consider, well, he's my favorite author. I think he's the greatest author of all time. Certainly debatable. I imagine I'll get emails on that, which is fine. But he wrote a book called Travel with Charlie, where he took off in a camper for 3 months and traveled around the country. And Charlie is his dog that he traveled with. And you've got to get this book. Matter of fact, when we're done, I'll get your address. I will send you a copy. But he wrote about the redwoods and how he was looking forward to showing these magnificent trees to his dog, thinking this would be the world's greatest fire hydrant for a dog, right? But the trees were so massive and so huge, the dog didn't recognize them as trees.
Right.
He actually had to go break a branch off another tree and stick it next to a redwood so the dog would pee on it. But that being said, he talks about how this is one of the great challenges of his writing life, is trying to describe these trees, that he found them uninspiring and all of the things that you were talking about, but he did not know how to put it down on paper. And this is a man who was as good or better with words than anyone I've ever had a chance to read. But I will make sure that you get a copy of that book. We'll get your
That'd be
address when
wonderful.
you're done.
You know, what I equate it to is, I worked at Grand Canyon for 10 years and, people have to put on their bucket list, I would say two things from my travels around the world here, is you really got to go to Grand Canyon, because no picture will ever capture the greatest canyon in the world, right? And it's magnificent in so many different ways that I could talk about endlessly on this podcast. And I feel equally now about the Sequoias and Redwoods, that I've seen so many pictures, and we work so hard to try to capture pictures of these enormous monarchs. And it's impossible to truly capture the feeling when you're in that magical old growth forest. It's quiet. It's just takes you out of this modern craziness and really resets folks and really resets their hearts, resets their souls, and puts our lives in perspective. And that's just like Grand Canyon. I feel like they're on the same level in a very different way. One's a hole and one goes to the sky, but they both do the same thing. They put us in perspective of we are here for a time. Let's do our best to kind of pass the world on as a better world, whatever we can do in service to each other and into the world.
Well, and I think you're right. And my memories of the redwoods, and I haven't been there in probably 4 or 5 years, but my memories of the redwoods are the awe-inspiring part, but it's the silence. It's if you're walking through, it's the leaves and it's quiet. It's like you're walking on padding and it's just stunning. And to your point about the Grand Canyon, it reminds me of the Grand Canyon in winter. The Grand Canyon in summer is one thing, but it's like Yellowstone in summer compared to, say, we were talking before the podcast about Lamar Valley and Yellowstone in the winter. Those are two completely different experiences. Those are apples and Chevys. They couldn't be further apart. And if you have a chance to experience those and you embrace the idea of being alone and being quiet and being one with nature for a while, I would add Lamar Valley in the winter to that list. But those would be my 3: Yellowstone in winter, Grand Canyon in winter, and the Redwoods anytime.
That's right.
Because there's always a place you can go and be by yourself in the Redwoods.
That's right.
Not always true in Yellowstone in the summer or the Grand Canyon in the summer, but both those places in the winter. Your mission statement, you talk about protect, restore, and connect people. I believe in your mission statement, the intent with protect and restore, you're referring to the redwoods.
Yeah.
But as I was reading it, as a man who has written hundreds of mission statements in his life, it seems to me that your entire mission statement could be talking about human beings. Protect, restore, and connect.
That's right.
That I assumed that you were talking in protect and restore about the trees.
Yes.
But really, it could just as easily, or maybe even better, be talking about us as human beings. You are trying to protect us and restore us and connect us. And these trees are a magnificent way to do that. These forests are, again, if you haven't been, everybody's seen the picture, you can drive the car through and, the General Sherman and all those different things. But my God, when you're alone in one of these forests, it is otherworldly. You are transformed as you said, they're a couple thousand years old. You're transformed to a different time.
That's right. Yeah, we are Save the Redwoods, but a lot of folks who are involved in this and who visit the Redwoods say, oh, well, we've worked with a lot of our partners. They say, we're so glad we got involved with you because now we realize the Redwoods saved us, right? Sometimes these are folks who were in the forest industry. These are folks who you would not, when they get involved in this restoration work, they get involved in this protection of these magical, unique forests, it just changes people and it changes their lives in a positive way. And it gives them a grounding that is just so needed right now. It's folks to really feel grounded and feel like they have some future. There's some hope. And that's what I think that these forests can provide.
So how are you getting that message out? How are you reaching people and letting them know that this is there? Why do people in New Jersey or Florida? I mean, I understand the theoretical reason, but how are you getting the attention of someone in Nebraska or South Carolina or New Jersey to the value of a forest in Northern California that they're probably never going to see?
Right. Yeah. I think there is, it's the same question, Scott, that folks would say about, well, what's the value of wilderness to a person in New Jersey, right? When I was in Montana, folks would say that. And there's some intrinsic value to many Americans about knowing that these areas are protected and they're protected in perpetuity for the benefit of Americans, for everyone. These are everyone's lands. These are available to everyone. They're to enjoy forever. Even if you never get to do it, it's there. And it creates that feeling that, okay, I'm part of that. I'm an American. I've contributed to that. I support the parks. I support the Forest Service. I support those who are protecting these lands. And that's really, to me, that's how you reach out to folks and say, even if you never get to come, these forests are yours as well. And this is part of your legacy that you're passing on to the next generation.
Are people hearing that message?
I think so. Yeah, we have supporters across the country. Most of our supporters are here in California who have experienced it personally. But every time I can get somebody out into the forest, once they see the work that we're doing in the forest, we have instant converts. And so I'm always encouraging folks to get out on the landscape and really experience all the great work we're doing and experience the forest as we're talking about the silence of the forest, the restorative nature of the forest. And that's a challenge for folks in Nebraska and New Jersey to make all the way out. But I think at least I would challenge folks to be aspirational and try to find a way to connect with these forests however you can.
So I wanted to back up when you were talking about working with the indigenous tribes and you were talking about controlled fires and bringing their sons and daughters out to see this. Is that something where the state gets involved? Are they sending out their fire departments and working with you on that, even though it's on private land?
Yes.
So we do have a public-private, nonprofit, indigenous coalition.
That's right. Yeah. So the partnership includes all those partners. Yeah, including, so in this case in California, it'd be CAL FIRE does come out and work with us on helping with the fire. And then the tribes themselves have capacity and have fire crews. And of course, the forest and the Park Service and other land management agencies like the Bureau of Land Management also have their own fire crews. And so all those crews work together and bring their own cultures of how to handle fire, but it's all around the same goal of bringing back this restorative fire and reducing the fuel load. There is broad consensus and agreement that this work needs to be done and needs to be done at scale. And so that's really the great part. So we at the League provide that glue, that partnership. We help bring these groups together and provide that, administrative support, that glue to hold these partnerships together, like the Giant Sequoia Land Coalition, to do this work in the Redwoods, like Redwood Rising in the Redwood Range. We bring the folks together to do this great work on the landscape.
So you're the facilitator?
Correct. And implementer in some areas.
Okay. So talk specifically about a couple of the exact projects that you're working on now. And then when you finish that, take us forward. What are you looking at for the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah. So let me start with that second part. So it's really important for folks to know that most of the old growth redwoods, there's only 5%. So of the entire redwood range, 95% has been cut down over the last century plus, right? And so there's only 5% that remains of this old growth, which is the trees that have not been cut down. And so most of the old growth has been protected, vast majority of it. So we realized that was a great work. A lot of work was done by the League in its first 100 years to protect those old growth. We're still going to continue to seek and find those old growth patches and try to protect them in perpetuity for for everyone's enjoyment and for the ecological benefit of those. But however, we realized that we needed to move to a new vision for what are we going to do to meet this challenge of our second century. And that's really what we're doing now. Everything we described here in terms of looking at trying to scale up the work we're doing. So we're looking at protecting much larger swaths of land in our second century in what we call our landscape scale. We're moving landscape scale in terms of protecting, instead of protecting smaller parcels of 5,000 acres or so, we're going to move to 10, 15, 100,000. We're looking at expanding to hundreds of thousands of acres of protected land that currently is in either active production, in terms of timber production, purchasing that land, putting it on trajectory towards these old growth characteristics. So it becomes old growth over time and gets protected. So we're protecting larger swaths of reviving the entire range. We're bringing back the whole range and providing those tools that will help us both maintain the ecosystem, maintain the local economies, but also protect much larger swaths. And so that's really our project for our second century that I spend a lot of time on, is trying to find ways to protect much larger swaths. And then also, as we do that, we have to do a lot of work to try to get them towards these old growth trajectories. And then we let the forest do what it does and grow and become the wonderful old growth forest that we were talking about earlier. And so there are a lot of specific projects in terms of land protection, but also specifically what I was talking about with restoration. We've been wildly successful with Redwood Rising, which is our large scale restoration project, as I discussed earlier, in Redwood National State Parks, attracting federal, state, and local and private philanthropy to that project. The private philanthropy that the league brought and this administrative support, the glue that it provides for that restoration work, has been able to be able to restore thousands and thousands of acres of parkland already in the last 5 years, and on trajectory to restore 10, 15,000 acres, which is a huge amount. So we're starting to move and increase the scale and pace that we need to do this restoration work with. And it's not just forest thinning with Redwood Rising. It's also because they clear cut, all that sediment came off the mountain and went into the creeks, and buried creeks for, over 50 years. There have been creeks that are buried in Redwood National and State Parks that we go in and we dig them out with backhoes. We dig down to the creek and we find the gravels, and then we rebuild the mountains. We remove all the old roads, we stabilize it, and we thin the forest, get it on its trajectory to old growth, and then we pull out. And we see, this forest is so resilient, it bounces right back. The fish come back within months. We see salmon and trout come back into these streams. I mean, this isn't like it's a generational work, but it's also your see results immediately for this work that we're doing there. And so it's a very specific project. And because we're so successful, we have these methods down, built on decades of research in terms of restoration work that's been done across these ranges. We've now consolidated that into a really great partnership that's very efficient to do this work at scale. And because it's a public-private partnership, we leverage the benefits of each of those different partners to make sure that we're being very efficient in this restoration work. And so that's a great example of work that we've been doing for now 6 years, Save the Redwoods League, working with both national and state parks, and now taking that same restoration work and trying to scale that up across the entire range.
I think that's fantastic work. And I'm seeing that more and more. I've recently had your peer or your equivalent from National Audubon Society and the American Bird Conservancy, and they're trying to do the same thing, right? Which is let's get back land, because in the end, that's what it's going to take. We can do all the other things and have all the little parks, and they're great, but they're not terribly dissimilar to zoos in that they're isolated, especially for non-flying animals, right? If you're a megafauna and you're trying to migrate and you can't get across, which then is the Yellowstone to Yukon, which I imagine you're familiar with, as they start to try to rebuild to bring that back. And so in the end, every time I talk to somebody who's running a conservation organization, it boils down to, we need dirt. We need dirt for these animals and these plants to survive. And in some cases, we need large amounts of it, right? If you're an elk or you're a bison and you're trying to migrate, or you're a redwood and you're trying to grow, you're not going to do that in somebody's backyard. Right. I can save a bunch of Carolina wrens here in my little bird sanctuary, but it does take some dirt. It does take. And are you finding that people are more willing to get involved with that?
Yes. Yeah. And so, that's a really great point to bring up, Scott, is that we really do target, when we talk about targeting much larger landscapes to protect, we target those areas between these old growth patches, so that we're really efficiently looking at, can we create a landscape that is a restored and stronghold for all these critters that depend on this old growth. And so we definitely target that. And we're finding that, yeah, that's really what we found, is that to really create resiliency in this forest, we really need to go much, much larger than what's protected right now, and try to create that, because there's so many benefits to creating a much larger ecosystem of protected lands. And that's really what we're looking at. And one thing that we haven't touched on, and one partnership that we haven't gone deep into in terms of that help, is working with tribes and finding ways that work with them to get them within their ancestral territories, working with us and doing the work of some of this restoration work as well. I talked about fire, but they also help us with all that the aquatic restoration work I was talking about earlier. And so this work, working with the local folks, is not just local communities, it's also the local tribes and working with them. And the league is able to facilitate that and build that partnership with tribes,
So
profit,
walk
and
us
bring them
through one
together.
of those.
What is
Pick
that?
a tribe and pick a project, something that you're working on now,
Hmm.
and walk us through how that's going. Help us
Okay.
understand. Did you open the door? Did you call the tribes and say, hey, this is who I am and this is what we
Yeah.
want to do? Can we sit down and talk about it? And then through your connections and your experience, were you able to call in government officials and say, so take us through, just pick
Yeah.
one and walk us through it.
Okay. So yeah, I have a great one for that. And so in 2013, Save the Redwoods League purchased a 125-acre property in Oric, California, which was an old mill site. And it's adjacent to Prairie Creek, which is one of the last strongholds for a whole bunch of salmon and trout species. And so it had a lot of great ecological benefit. And the league purchased it with the intent to restore this, industrial landscape back to its natural landscape. It also was adjacent to the southern gateway to Redwood National and State Parks. So they wanted to create a community access, a visitor access for the millions of visitors that come to the park, to have a southern gateway that showed a restored landscape. And so the league was able to build a coalition of state and national parks, as well as the Yurok tribe in that area. And the Yurok tribe brings a great deal of expertise and capacity. And so not only is the Yurok tribe a partner in the actual planning and implementation of this restoration work and building this trails gateway that we built to welcome these millions of visitors, but they've also actually implemented the work. The tribal members are actually doing the restoration work. And so that bringing in that coalition of folks has attracted a great deal of both private and public funding from both state and federal sources, as well as private philanthropy. And so we've been able to restore and create a whole bunch of back channel habitats create a great deal of aquatic habitat. This was a channelized stream that now has a great deal of additional habitat for these salmonids. And also, I think just equally as important, because we built this trail gateway right next to it, these folks who are visiting will now get to see what a large scale restoration project looks like in a very accessible way, right from their car, right from the parking lot. They can look right over to one side and see this creek, and this is what a restored creek looks like. This is what you can take. And so we can talk about that story. But here's the exciting part, Scott. And so a few years ago, the parks, working with the tribe, when I was at the park as superintendent, I worked with the league and we worked with the Yurok tribe, and we decided it was going to be returned to the national. It was going to be turned over to the National Park Service to be part of Redwood National Park. But instead, we decided that it would be better that we transfer the property to the Yurok tribe and work with them and have them tell the story. Have them be the owners and have tribal voices. Since the tribal hands had already restored the property, let's have the tribe own this property in perpetuity, welcoming these millions of visitors. So they're not only welcoming them to Redwood National State Park, they're also welcoming the Yurok country. And so that's where we're at right now. We're going to be rolling that out in April. We expect to transfer to the Yurok tribe, where they will now own this property, welcoming visitors to the southern gateway of Redwood National State Park and Yurok country, telling the stories with their voice at this property, while also showing off this wonderful, wonderful restoration work that's been done, as well as providing trail access to old growth redwood forest in the adjacent Redwood National Park. So it's a very exciting project. It's a great example of working with the tribe and working with national, state, and private philanthropy to really bring back not just restoration, but connecting people to that restoration work, as well as recreational opportunities in that area.
And then the tribe becomes ambassadors
Mm-hmm.
for the trees. And in a way, the trees become ambassadors for the tribe. They're
Yeah.
bringing awareness to the tribe that otherwise wouldn't exist. And I imagine that spreads out beyond the trees to some of their cultural history and
Yep.
some of the things they
Right.
bring. So are you able then to use this as an example to go to other tribes in Northern California and
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, here's what we can do. Call them and see what it's like to work with us.
That's right. Yeah, we
Right?
do. So we work with tribes at many other properties. We have another property in Sonoma County, which is, several miles down the road to the south of where I was just describing along the coast. And we're working with the Kashaya Band of the Pomo people and working on a plan for, co-management with them and the adjacent state park, Fort Ross, that's there, and trying to work to manage that property again for public access, as well as having the tribe re-engaging in their ancestral land. And I was out there, Scott. I got to tell you one story when I was out at Sonoma Coast
Please.
Redwood property. And so we had what we call the Kashaya Days, where we welcome the tribe. It's still legal right now. And we invited the tribe to come out, all the tribal members to come out. And it was just, I went out there and we toured the property, and the tribal elders came out. Some of the tribal leadership came out with us, and we toured the property. And to go to that property and hear the elders tell the stories. So this is a very unique property. Fort Ross is the southernmost Russian outpost in North America.
Okay.
Wrap your head around that, right? The Russians were this far into California. And so the Russians there drove out this Shaya from this property, 150 years ago. And now they're getting to revisit it and to hear the elders talk about, they knew about village sites, they knew about cultural sites, they knew about the property. They've just not had access to it for over 150 years. And because their ancestors got driven from this. And we were at one site that was particularly important. And one elder just told that she said she could feel her ancestors at this site, thanking all of us in this group for being back. And it felt like welcoming home. And just that feeling that the tribes welcome us in, they're re-engaging in their ancestral territory. They're being welcomed back to property that they were driven from, and we can be part of that. So we're restoring the landscape, we're restoring the ecosystem, but we're also restoring the cultural heritage for these folks who were treated so badly for so many decades by so many different folks. And that is just really, again, a really inspiring story of, we're not just connecting a whole variety of underserved communities, but we're really connecting those folks who were driven from this landscape, who cared for it for generations before settlers came in and European folks came in. They cared for it for much longer than we've been here on this continent. And now they get to reconnect with that landscape, and be part of that is just an amazing, amazing part of the great story that is Save the Redwoods League.
So are you finding then that the tribes in general are welcoming to the conversation and the effort, that they see this as a positive?
Yes. Yeah. So we find, so the tribes we come with, an open heart and an open mind, because every tribe is a different tribe. Every tribe is unique. And so we come and we listen and we engage them where they're at and what they want to see. And that's how we start every conversation. They help us. We're co-stewarding this property with them. And in partnership. And I think coming with that attitude has really created an open environment where we work with a great deal of tribes across the state of California. And it's really been magnificent work to do.
So you've talked about the impact it has in maybe healing some wounds and paying some old debts that we've accumulated and all of those things. But also you had mentioned early on in your education, the economics.
Yes.
Is there an ecotourism component to this? I know, again, for example, in the birding world, once you can convince locals that they can make more money by renting out Airbnbs and giving tours than by killing the birds and eating them, it's a pretty simple conversion. Is there an ecotourism component to some of the stuff that you're doing?
Well, certainly, yeah, certainly tourism and folks coming, and tourism provides an economic base for a lot of these rural communities. But, just as equally important are some of the jobs I was talking about with the restoration economy related to restoring folks, because those jobs, in terms of, we actually need folks who are not traditionally in the tourism business, like backhoe operators and log truck drivers. And we're providing those type of jobs too, through this work of restoring the landscape. And we can provide those to those very folks we're talking about. A lot of times to folks in these tribes who want to work on their ancestral lands. They want to work where they grew up. So they get to work locally in their lands, healing and restoring it. And they also get good paying long-term jobs doing this work. And so really, to me, that's where my incentive is we will do that work first, and the tourism will come as we restore these places and open them up for public access. The tourism will come naturally. But right now we're in the mode of trying to create these relationships to build this economy around restoring this very damaged landscape.
And so how many acres are we talking about now? You mentioned that we only have 5% of the redwoods that we had at a historical height. And now you're purchasing some different land and you're doing things. How many acres are you facilitating or managing with the Redwoods currently? And what would a goal be in 30 or 40 years?
Right. Yeah. So the goal for the next 100 years, because our plan is actually over 100 years, is 800,000 acres under a protected status. Of that, we like to see 400,000, so about half of that, to be in some level of more active protected status, being some type of conservation easement, some type of restriction on how the forestry is going, so it's very sustainable forestry practices and providing more of those ecological services we provided than just being an industrial forest. And so, but then that 400,000 we'd like to put under ownership of the league to help protect and move it towards those old growth trajectories, to really create those large swaths of old growth forests that are really needed to create the resilience against the coming climate change that's coming and the wildfire impacts that are there. And so that's really our long-term goal for what we're doing as the league. And we're just starting on that process now. And we'll take baby steps as we move up and scale this up. But I have great faith that we can just, it's the if you build it, they will come type of model for how to do this work. As we show that we can do this at scale, much larger scales, we're hoping those money and resources will come to support this work, and people will see the value in protecting large swaths of this magical forest.
So it almost sounds like the first 100 years of the league was triage, a desperate attempt to save the trees from being
Yep.
wiped out. And now that that's been a little bit stabilized, we've got climate change and fire on the horizon, of course. But now that that's been a little bit stabilized, now the idea is, okay, the patient survived. Now we've got to begin the rehab and move out and do all those things long term. Is that a
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily the patient survived. I think it's just realizing this is the state of the patient. The patient this is all that's left, right? There's only 5% left, and it's all pretty much protected. So we really needed to look at what does the forest need now, and this is what the forest needs now. There really isn't any more old growth of any significant size to protect anymore. And so we need to shift
so you've got to create it?
yeah, so we have to create it, exactly. And the only way you're going to create it is by doing this restoration work we've been describing.
And you see immediate benefits to the restoration work as far as fish coming back, and
Yes.
I imagine there's some fauna that works their way back into
Yeah.
these forests. But how long before one of these projects where you're buying land, you're restoring creeks, and you're doing all this, how
Yeah.
long before that becomes an old growth forest?
Right. Well,
What's
that's a
the
great
timeline
question.
there?
Yeah, yeah. So it's going to be more. So I'm more talking about old growth characteristics. Is it providing the habitat qualities that the critters need who depend on the old growth? And so those trees will show that, within 50 to 100 years sometimes, as we move to this. But now, will it look like an old growth forest that's, ancient, that has never been touched? That will take much, much longer. But will it provide the ecological services and provide maybe even that inspiration? A second growth forest can be inspirational as well if it's been restored. Will it provide those services? Yes, it will, much, much sooner. And so you're looking at, it's still, even in the short term, it's an amazing resilient forest. I worked in the high desert at Great Basin and Grand Canyon for so long. And if you scratch the earth like we do here and you did this heavy restoration work, it would take millennia to restore. But this forest, it's like you're there, and within 6 months, the fish are back. Within a few years, the native species has popped back up. You're already seeing this. You're seeing all the things we want to see. We're seeing within just a few handful of years. And it's just because this is really, as I mentioned earlier, acre for acre, the most productive ecosystem around to sequester carbon. That means it's just, if you're going to invest in restoration, do it in the Redwoods, because you're going to get your best bang for the buck. Just, it's so inspiring to come out and see these second growth. I've never had a person come out and see the restoration work we've done and gone, oh yeah, no, this was a waste of money. Not one person. And I've taken hundreds, if not thousands of people out on these sites. And even the most skeptical people who may have here or there, they might want to see it a little bit different. Everyone leaves inspired by the scale of the work we're doing and how quickly this forest is resilient and bounces back, and how valuable this work is.
Well, Steve, that's spectacular. I applaud you for the work that you're doing and the accumulation of your career that has led you to do this. And I appreciate it. I've got tremendously positive memories of all of that. So it's a neat thing to see. Hey, I'm going to throw my email up here. If anybody's got any questions of me, send them in. If you've got questions of Steve, send them in and I'll make sure that he gets them. And Steve, you have a book that you want to recommend to the audience, something to share?
Yeah, going back again to my childhood, I really was moved by Aldo Leopold and the Sand Country Almanac. And I think really grounding in some of that foundational environmental work by Walden, Leopold, and those really set me on the trajectory to where I am now. If folks haven't seen those, maybe the newer generations, maybe that's old school for folks, I would really recommend visiting some of those foundational environmental inspirational documents that really started this whole movement, because it really got me going on this. And that's what I would recommend for folks who haven't seen those books to take a look. And I think they'll really enjoy it.
Well, we will recommend that. It's up on the screen now so people can see the cover. I have to point this out because I ask every guest this same question, and maybe this is the Cornell connection. But do you know Drew Lanham at Cornell?
No, I don't.
Okay, Drew Lanham is an ornithologist. He's
Yes.
casually known as the Dean of Blackbirders. He's a tremendous guy. He's in my book, Why We Love Birds, and he's a podcast guest. And he recommended the exact same book
Wonderful.
that you did.
Yeah.
So with your permission, I'm going to send an email to Drew and copy you on it and introduce the two of you, because philosophically you should know each other. And two people who harken back to childhood or early adulthood to pick a favorite book probably should know each other in this world.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go ahead and do that.
That's wonderful. I probably met him at the Lab of Ornithology out there. So, which is
You may very well have. If you've been out there, you would. He's a tall, distinguished looking
Yes.
black guy, and he's a poet. I've had him read poetry on this show. He's a terrific. As a matter of fact, he's on a show I believe we're doing it in January with Chris Cooper, who you may know from the Central Park incident a couple years ago during COVID, and Scott Edwards, who heads up the Natural History Museum at Harvard. The three of them are going to discuss how the birding world has changed in the last half century for black birders.
Oh, interesting.
And they are all 50-year plus birders.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's going to be an exciting show, and I'll make sure you know when that's on. I appreciate everybody who's listening to the show, Apple, Spotify, wherever you are. If you happen to be watching us on YouTube, do me a favor and subscribe. There's no cost to subscribing. You just hit the button, maybe drop a comment or a like. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the more people we get to like it, the more YouTube pushes us out there, and the more the message, for example, that Steve is trying to share, it just reaches more people. It's just that simple. And at the same time, it brings in guests. It brings in different guests. If they say, hey, Scott's podcasts are reaching a large number of people, that's worth an hour of my time. We all kind of benefit from that. So I'm hoping you'll do that. I'm going to do a field notes after this, which I do. And Steve, if you haven't seen one of my podcasts, at the end of every one of them, I do about an 8 to 10 minute thing where I pick a single plant or park or, animal or whatever it is, and just do a solo 8 to 10 minutes on it, do some research and share some things. And as I wrap this up, and I do this every time when I get to the end, Steve, is I encourage everybody to get out and see nature. And in this case, if you get a chance to go to Northern California and see the redwoods, if you haven't seen it, you really need to. Steve's right about that. But I tell everybody to get out as often as they can. And when you are out, stay safe and stay curious. Steve, thanks so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing our message, Scott. I really appreciate the time.
You bet. Hello and welcome to the 32nd issue or episode, I guess, of Field Notes. We follow up every podcast with a Field Notes, which is my chance just to focus on a single subject. Today's was kind of easy. This Field Notes is following the podcast with Steve Mietz and Save the Redwoods League. You don't have to have seen that podcast. The Field Notes are always good as a standalone. But if you have seen it, you're going to be even more intrigued by this. Today is Redwood National and State Park. And I'm excited about that. I'm going to try to do a field notes on every one of the national parks, of which there are 63. So today's is another in that series. The trees, well, the park we're going to talk about, but it's really the trees. That's what the park is. These trees are over 300 feet tall. They can be up to 2,000 years old. They are the tallest living being in the history of by volume, they are the second largest. The largest actually is their cousin, the Sequoia. And we will talk about Sequoia National Park another day, another time. But these two trees are cousins. So the Sequoia is, let's say, thicker or chunkier, and the redwood is taller. And by the way, the largest living organism in the history of the world is a fungus. It's mycelium. It's in Oregon's Blue Mountains, and it covers 4 square miles. All right, let's get back to the redwoods. They take a huge percentage of their water from coastal fog, up to 150 gallons a day. That's why all redwoods live along the coast. They need the coastal fog to survive. It is an important component of their habitat. Their bark can be up to a foot thick, 1 foot thick, and that's to resist fire and insects. So it's just this huge piece of armor, if you will, on the outside of these trees that allows it to survive most insect and most fire attacks. The roots are relatively shallow for a tree that can get up to 3,000 feet high. 6 to 12 feet maybe is a decent sized root, but they can extend hundreds of feet in all directions, all around. So they still have that firm and strong base. Now, the redwoods, in my mind, they're so large that a national park wasn't enough. They had to create a national and state park. So it's Redwood National and State Parks. And it's one of the few temperate rainforests left. They get over 100 inches a year of rain, which makes them unique, well, everywhere. And just a spectacular place. Some of the life that they support, huge birding life, including spotted owls. And we need all the habitat we can get for them. Roosevelt elk and coho salmon. It's just amazing. So you have this joint effort. You have, in 1968, Redwood National Park was established, but now they are working with the state as well in a joint effort. And so they've combined Redwood National Park with Jedediah Smith, Del Norte Coast, and Prairie Creek Redwood State Parks to form this giant conglomerate. And we need to protect these. If you saw the podcast with Steve Mietz, you know that. But by 1950, 95% of the old growth redwoods had been harvested. We were down to 5%. Now, through the efforts of the Save the Redwoods League and some others, we have saved that 5%. So if we're able to stop them from getting slaughtered by one of these climate change generated fires, we should be okay. There are efforts being made to regrow these things, to get some land and whatnot, but it's going to take a couple hundred years. It's not an easy process to grow a 300-foot tree, but nonetheless, the efforts are being made. Now, the park itself, you get about 400,000 visitors annually. So it's a good-sized park. It's a great park. The park is about 50 miles long. And here's what makes it so cool. You can actually drive through the park on what's known up in that area as the Redwood Highway. It's US Highway 101, right? So it's the 101. It's the coastal highway. It's this fantastic highway. I've driven it, well, literally hundreds of times. But you can drive about 50 miles of that through the park. From the north, you enter from Crescent City. And from the south, you enter from Oric, and you are literally driving through a national park. And you can see these trees and be a part of this just as part of your driving tour, going from north to south or south to north along the coast. So it is a really cool thing. And I hope that you get a chance to do that. Now, if you have more time to spend, because you'll be in awe when you see these trees, you'll just be in absolute awe. You're going to find that there are more than 200 miles of trails along this throughout the forest. So you can sit and do all of the hiking that you want to do. You can park and hike and go to the visitor centers and whatnot. So it really does run the gamut from these long, beautiful hikes, solitary and isolated. It's almost like being in the sound booth because the areas that you walk on are so padded with all of the leaves and the droppings and the barks. It's just soft and quiet. It's unimaginably beautiful. And I hope that you get an opportunity to do that. And because it's a coastal tree, you can actually go down on the coast where you can listen to the waves crash. You can walk among the tide pools, and then you can look up at these massive 300-foot trees. If you get an opportunity, if you're in Northern California, take a shot, go up there and see it. Not enough people do. Quite a few people do by accident just because they're driving the 101. And then maybe they're kind of sucked into this vortex of beauty and quiet and solitude. But if you can make a point of it, I ask that you do. And we're going to talk another time about Sequoia National Park, more magnificent trees, another place where I've spent a lot of time, done a lot of camping, and I think you'll enjoy that as well. So thank you for listening. I appreciate that. If you're on one of the podcast platforms, really do appreciate that. If you happen to be watching me right now on YouTube, do me a favor, reach over and click subscribe. No cost, no time, no nothing. Just hit subscribe. Well, everybody that does that, YouTube pushes us out to more and more people. And if you drop a comment or hit like, it just adds to it. It allows us to bring more guests on the podcast, allows us to reach more people with the message, maybe allows us to introduce more people to the Redwoods. So if you get an opportunity to do that, please do. And as I suggest, anytime you can, get outside, man, get outdoors and savor it. And when you do, stay safe and stay curious. Have a great day.